All right, so yesterday we talked about three different empires, the Ottoman, the Safavid, and we just kind of mentioned the Mughal Empire. We'll get more in detail of that a bit later. But in general, one of the things that we know is that the Safavid Empire is different in at least two ways from the rest of the Muslim world. One way, for example, Lewis, that they're different than the Muslim world. How so, Miss Lewis? They're Shia, right? So, like, you should definitely remember and know that in the Muslim world, there's this divide, there's this division, and it all has to do with who takes over after Muhammad's death. Remember, Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. There can't be any prophets after Muhammad. And so, after Muhammad dies, the majority say, you know what, we need to elect the next leader, elect the caliph, and they elect Abu Bakr. They think Abu Bakr is a good guy. He's been there from the beginning. But there's another group of people, the Shia, who say, no, it shouldn't go to Abu Bakr. It should go to a male relative of the Prophet. Muhammad had no son, but he has a cousin and a son-in-law who married his daughter Fatima, who is that cousin? Ali. Bummer, Ali dies. But before Ali dies, he told something super important to his son Hussein. He told all the super secret information that is the secret recipe of Islam. And because of that, we have a title, because this goes from father, son, father, son. We call this a series of imams or religious teachers. And this father, son pattern went all the way to which imam? The 12th. And that 12th imam, what happened to him? Disappeared. He wasn't killed. He wasn't kidnapped. In fact, Shias today believe that the 12th Imam was taken to heaven where he is right now. And he's going to come back one day at the end of the world. We also talked about the linguistic divide, that in the Muslim majority world in red, most people speak Arabic, but they don't speak it in Iran as their first language. They speak Persian. We mentioned that at least many languages use the Arabic alphabet. They're all using the Arabic characters, but they're all pronounced differently. We saw the same thing with Latin. We also looked at architecture. We saw some common themes of blue tile, of calligraphy, of geometry. These are the things we see again and again and again. And we even see it in other cultures like Mexico, probably because of the 700 years that Muslims ruled Spain, and there's an influence. Today we're going to look at culture again on the handout, and first of all we're going to talk about the role of women in society. And based on the slide, you can see there's various types of clothing that women ought to wear in a Muslim society. Whether it's the hijab or the burqa, the point is that women should be modestly dressed. You know, they want women to be modest, and they want women to be covered. And it could go from a simple hijab, a simple veil, to what is called the burqa. With the burqa, you can't even see what? The eyes, right? And maybe this is a good thing, some would argue, because if we had Chantel in a burqa, then you would have to make any judgments about Chantel based on really only what factor? No, I mean, I would say he's wrong, but yeah, I think Miss Lewis says it right. The personality, right? So maybe that would be better if our society would judge people perhaps by, other than these physical features. So became popular in the country of Afghanistan in the 1990s to the early 2000s. Different countries have different rules, but we're going to write down that women seldom appeared in public spaces. We don't want to they seldom appeared in public spaces. We don't want to send these women to the market where these men will just be, staring at them, making judgments. We want our women at home, no need for them to advertise themselves out in public. Women seldom appeared in public spaces in the Safavid Empire. And even though that is kind of limiting, we can kind of be bummed about that. It says that under Islamic law, there was something really great that happened in Sharia law. And we'll write down that women could own property. This was a really big deal. And this was definitely a good thing that Muhammad argued for, because it used to be, there was a lot of things that you could experience as a girl or as a woman that changed for the better after Muhammad. For example, before Muhammad, before Islam, what might happen if you had a baby girl? Yeah, like you might say, you know what, I don't have the money for a baby girl. The word for that is infanticide. Suicides where you take your own life, homicide, the life of another, genocide, the life of a race of people, and infanticide is where you kill a baby. And that was super common before Muhammad, before Islam. And Muhammad said that's wrong, and he brought an end to infanticide. He also argued that women deserve property, that if you have brothers, it used to be the case that once your mom and dad died, only your brothers got property. If Chantel was the only child, well, it would actually go to Chantel's like random male cousin that she met once at a Christmas, because people believe, even in Europe, in white European Christian Europe, that women could not own property. Islam says the opposite. The third line, it says men and women covered their arms, their legs, and their hair. So it's not actually just women who cover themselves. In fact, women and men cover themselves. If you look at the picture on the slide, I'll blow it up for you. We see that there's men, and they're dressed very conservatively. They have head covering. They're not showing a lot of skin themselves. So it's not just women who covered themselves and dressed conservatively, but the men did as well. Men and women covered their arms, their legs, and their hair. Now, one of the ways that we can learn a bit about a society is look at the things that they wrote. We can look at their books, we can look at their songs, look at their movies in the modern day. And we've done that with the Safavid society. And the fourth line, we'll write down that poetry. We'll write down poetry on that blank. And there's a typo on your handout because I'm a man and I make many mistakes every day of my life. It should say that poetry spoke of love between men and women. And that is not anything new or anything we're not used to, because we see that, even today, with February 14th, Single Awareness Day is coming up real soon. And some of you guys will be, reinforced your non-dating status and whatnot. So we see love poems and love songs all the time, but we also see that these poems don't just talk about love between men and women. We're also going to write down on the handout, and love for beardless boys, love for, in that blank. Now, we've actually talked about this in our curriculum already. And if you look at this photograph, which is from Uzbekistan, about 1905, there's a group of these men that we've pointed out. They're bearded. They're actually, what are these things in their hands, does it appear to be? Not rifles. They're instruments. They've got a guy playing drums, blah, blah, blah. And so they're kind of hanging out here. And then there's this one person without a beard, or actually two people without a beard. And this person without a beard is wearing a dress. This person without a beard has long hair. And this person is something we've studied before called a dancing boy. You might remember we've seen this in contemporary Afghanistan, where for hundreds of years, what they would do is they'll have these boys who have not yet hit puberty, these boys who have not started being able to grow a beard, and they will dress them as women. Sometimes they'll have them long hair, and they'll dance for men in parties, in different social settings like that. And sadly for these boys, they'll then have physical sexual relationships with them. We saw that this happens, and these events are spoken of regularly. We showed a video about this last semester. I wanted to, again, just show you this 2-minute video on that. And correct. But I've had a lot of people who did not remember that at all. And so I wanted to take just 2 minutes, 49 seconds to show you that again. This is in Afghanistan today. These are called dancing boys. And what they'll do, of course, is they'll recruit 9 to 12-year-olds. They'll say, hey, I'm going to tutor you, and tutoring and training you. You're my apprentice, means I'm going to have sex with you. And I'm going to train you because this is what men are going to expect of you. And they'll typically target boys who are poor. They don't have any prospects, and this is going to be their job. And well, this boy in this particular video, he's probably not fully aware of what's going to happen to him. And he's going to meet this old man for the first time. And as they're interviewing him, they're like, hey, well, are you going to have sex with him later today? He's like, yeah, of course I am. How else am I going to train this kid? Go ahead. So I mean, they're going to be recruiting from poor working class families, and you don't want to have someone who like has a beard because you're like, yeah, that doesn't look like a woman at all. But if you have a younger boy and who grow his hair out and his voice hasn't changed yet, that would be okay. So we've seen this before, but I want to show you this clip again.
دستگیر فعلا کجا میریم ما شما؟
میریم اون بچه پیدا میکنیم که با وزن برابر باشه 12-13 ساله باشه خوبش باشه
باز شوانه هم که تیمو شما میباشه
بله ها میگیم مادر و پدر میگیم که ما شاگرد تربیه میکنیم
باز اونا اجازه میکنیم؟
بله ها
چیزی وعده میکنیم؟
پیسه میتیم
یعنی شما اکثرا بچه رو میرین که وضع زندگیش هم خوب نیست غریب است
غریب است دیگه اینا تقوی نیست
ششو میباشی؟
میره شاگرد میگیرم نگاه میکنم
اینا را از وقت مشناختی؟
نه
So that's terrible, right? But these practices happen even to this day. This is something that we've talked about, we've looked at before. And so we see poetry in the Safavid Empire talking not just about love between men and women, but also love for these beardless boys. These same-sex, these homosexual relationships with adolescent boys were neither unusual or hidden. They weren't hiding these relationships. They weren't trying to downplay it. They were openly practiced. In fact, in Afghanistan, where there's areas today that are partially ruled by warlords, some men think of themselves as greater men if you have more boys that you have these sexual relationships with. In fact, some generals in Afghanistan today say, my men won't listen to me unless I have some beardless boys. If my men knew I don't have a whole cadre of boys I'm having sex with, I would be respected less. I would be looked down upon. I have to keep up with the other generals by having my group of beardless boys. So this is something that's not just in 2021, but all the way back, not only to the 1900s, like this photograph, but even further back to the Safavid Empire. Now, girls are not going to be part of this. These boys are for like these random sexual hookups. Girls aren't going to experience this, but they will experience something different. They're going to experience child marriage, where girls are expected to marry. It's not like you're choosing who you're going to get married to. You're going to be arranged, and it's not uncommon that you're going to get married off pretty young. In fact, really, what's the only biological thing that needs to happen to you before they're going to look at marrying you off to someone? What's that? Your period, right? Like, as soon as you can have a period, what good thing in the minds of a man can you start doing? Yeah, and like having children. Like that's the big thing. Is like having children. So sadly, sometimes in the Safavid Empire, we'll have grown men in their 30s and 40s getting married to, to tweens, to really young kids. One example of this in the modern times in Afghanistan arranged marriages still occur quite a bit. There's a famous example of a young lady. She was 13 years old and she was given as an arranged marriage to a much older man. I think her family had actually killed a member of a different family, and to make peace with the families, it was said that this 13-year-old had to marry this older dude. Well, she didn't want to get married to this older man, and so they decided that she ran away and she was caught. And so they decided, look, we have to punish this teenage girl. How can we punish this girl? We don't want to like kill her. We don't want to, end her life, but we need to do something to discipline her so that she knows her place in this patriarchal system, and a system where, if we wrong one another, we use arranged marriages to pay. And they decided to physically punish her. This is a photograph from the cover of Time magazine, maybe about 10 years ago. I think 2010 is what it says. And what did they do to this young lady? Yeah, they cut off her nose. This was at August 9th, 2010. And so this image is indicative of what some girls experience, if they were to resist these arranged marriages as teenage girls with men in their 40s and stuff like that. And the thing about this is they thought, what, every morning she has to get up and get ready, and this is the image she'll see. So she'll know her proper place. She'll know the value of honoring the decisions your parents make for you. Now, she ended up running away again, and she was actually found by U.S. forces. You might recall we've been in Afghanistan since 2001, and she was actually brought to the United States. The U.S. Army decided that if we were to leave her, that she might, having run away more than once, experience severe consequences. So she actually lives in the United States today. She lives in Maryland, and the U.S. government actually paid for her to have reconstructive surgery. So this is that young lady today with plastic surgery being paid for by our government. And so these are some, what's that? So this idea of getting married young, it actually goes back a long time. There's a story on your handout about Aisha. And you might remember Aisha was one of Muhammad's wives. And we have a story about when Aisha got married to Muhammad. And it says, actually, you might remember, there's the Quran, which is cool, but also important is something called the Hadith. And the Hadith is the collections of things Muhammad said and things Muhammad did. And so it's like the biography of the Prophet Muhammad. And there's a really famous guy named Bukhari. And Bukhari is like the most trustworthy guy who ever collected stories of Muhammad. And Bukhari actually interviewed Aisha and said, hey, when did you meet Muhammad? When did you guys hook up? When did you get married? And this is what Bukhari tells us. It says on our handout, Aisha's age at the time of marrying the Prophet Muhammad comes from a hadith and one of the most authentic collections, that of Bukhari, in which Aisha says this, quote, the messenger of God married me when I was, you'll write down, age 6. She got married at age 6. Now, Aisha tells us that this marriage was not yet consummated. The word consummated means there was no physical intimacy. There was no sex act between Muhammad in his, I think, late 30s and Aisha, or maybe not late 30s. I don't know how old he was at this time. I'd have to look that up. But she was 6, but there was no sex act yet. That would happen, though. In fact, Aisha goes on to say the consummation, the marriage was consummated. They had physical intimacy. She says, Muhammad had consummated the marriage with me when I was 9. And so here we have an example of the Prophet Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old, having sex with a 9-year-old. This is according to her own testimony. So because Muhammad is the example for all men, we do see instances where these girls are put in these situations where they might be asked to marry someone much older, and there is a precedent for that situation happening. So this is what we see. Let's go to the back side. We'll finish this up. So it says economic crisis and political collapse. So there's a problem with the Safavid Empire, and this is the problem we also have with the Ottoman Empire as well. And one of the problems was that the Safavid Empire didn't really modernize the way it should have. In fact, for countries that modernize, they start producing different types of goods. They have various things that they have their hands in. But for the Safavids, they had very few products that they were sending around the world. And this is one of the few products they had. They had actually luxury carpets. And we'll write that down on our first blank on the back side, that luxury carpets became a staple or a main part of Persian exports. So these carpets were like widely considered some of the best carpets in the world, like pieces not of just like a random thing you step on, but actually pieces of art. And these could actually cost a whole lot of money for the quality that these carpets were. They could be status symbols for the carpets that these Persians were exporting, these Persian rugs. Sometimes we hear an expression. I mean, I don't know. I've never been able to afford a Persian rug. I went to a rug market in Morocco once, though, and even in Morocco, you have these guys, making these rugs by hand, and the costs are astronomical. And that's just like I went to a Moroccan rug market, and like thousands and thousands of dollars for these rugs. So just the quality, everyone would know, is the best quality in the world, they argued. Well, apart from this, there wasn't really a lot that the Safavids were known for doing. In fact, it says on the next line, that manufacturing was not a main part of the Safavid economy. Manufacturing is like where you are making stuff, you're manufacturing, you're making, say, guns or equipment or other goods. And this is a problem because if you look at the rest of the world, England and France, they are manufacturing and they are making money. If you look at the rest of the world, Italy, cities like Venice, they're manufacturing and they're making money. And the problem with the Safavids is that they are refusing to modernize and they're going to get left behind. In fact, it says on the third line that most people were subsistence farmers. If you don't know, that word is SUBSISTENCE. If you're a subsistence farmer, what does that mean as regarding how much you grow on your farm? Just to live, just enough to get by. You're not actually growing anything extra to sell. You're not actually growing anything extra to advance your social standing. You're actually just making enough to get by. And actually that's kind of not good because even we studied enslaved Africans were growing extra food to sell. In fact, some enslaved Africans sold so much extra stuff. What were they able to purchase with the money they made? They were able to actually get manumission, get freedom. Even though they're enslaved Africans, the Safavid economy, most people were actually just growing enough to get by. They're not modernizing. They're not keeping up with the rest of the world. And because of that, they're going to get left behind by countries like Portugal, like Spain, like France, like the Netherlands. It says on the next line, another challenge they have has to do with their army. Their army was staffed, we'll write down, by slave soldiers. We've seen this exact same thing before because the Ottoman Empire had slave soldiers. We called the slave soldiers of the Ottoman Empire Janissaries. And there's a similarity between what the Safavids are doing and what the Ottomans did. What was the original religion of those Janissary slave soldiers? They were white Europeans, and they were what religion? They were Christian, right? Well, on the slide here in yellow, Iran is here, modern-day Iran. This is Safavid Empire. But then there's this country right here. This is actually modern-day Georgia. And the people of Georgia, the country, not the state, have been Christian for like 1,700 years. And so the beauty of Georgia is that they're not Muslims. And if they're not Muslims, you know what they're eligible to become? They're eligible to become slaves. And so they had these slave soldiers, it says, taken from the Christian region of Georgia. This is the exact same thing that the Ottoman Empire does. They get slave soldiers, they bring them in, and they're Christian, they're a different group. And guess what new piece of technology they're going to give to these Christian slave soldiers, because this piece of technology isn't something the cavalry wanted to use. Guns, exactly right. So we see some parallels, and that's why sometimes these three empires, these three land-based empires, sometimes they're called gunpowder empires because they did use guns, but the way they used it was in a limited way that will really keep them from being as successful as the Western European countries. It says on the handout, we have another problem. The problem is inflation. Now, we've talked about inflation before when prices go up, and the more prices go up, the more you need of gold or silver to pay your bills. Who is the culprit? Who is guilty and responsible for making global inflation a reality in the 15 and the 1600s? Spain. You might remember, you need to remember that Spain had taken over the Americas. They got literally tons of silver from South America, tons of gold from the Aztec, and Mansa Musa caused local inflation in Cairo. The Spanish caused global inflation on the entire planet. We saw that inflation wasn't actually tackled by the Ottomans and it hurt them. Same thing happens here with the Safavids. It says inflation due to Spanish silver hurt their economy. They have economic problems. They don't know how to deal with these. They don't know how to challenge these economic problems from Spanish silver, and they could not pay their army or their officials. And once you have a country, you can't pay your army, you can't pay your officials, you are in a situation where the amount of time left for your country is very limited. Finally, it says on your handout for today, the government fell apart in 1722 because they would not modernize. Because they would not modernize. 1722. That's the Safavid Empire, this Shia empire. They would not modernize. It led to their fall. They didn't know how to deal with inflation. They had an army that was divided among these Christian slave soldiers with new technology and also traditional cavalry who didn't want to use the guns and didn't really trust them. The average person in the Safavid Empire was just farming to survive and not manufacturing or doing the things that would be needed in order for them to be successful. Tomorrow we're going to take a look at Russia and the Mughals. Friday we have a quiz. If we're done with the quiz for those who are retesting to go over that, we'll see in just 1 second.